Okay.
Yeah. Well, comrades, you're all very welcome to this meeting organised by Workers' International Network. And the topic tonight is Palestine. I'm fortunate to have as our speaker, Elaine Bradley. But before we get to the discussion about Palestine, I want to introduce Marcia Gitoji, who's going to speak about her experiences, her terrible experiences working in the mining industry in Namibia. Marcia was a union rep on the company, which is owned by a Chinese group, and Marcia will explain the hardship that she's going through since her victimization by the company, not just the company, but by the police and the state forces in Namibia. And Marcia will also be speaking about a financial appeal and a day of action in support of the sacked workers of the union in Namibia, the Security Workers Union, as it's called, and Marcia is a rep. So before we go into discussion on Palestine, I want to introduce Marcia to talk about her experience in Namibia and the importance of taking action in solidarity with Marcia. So, Marcia, there you go. You still with us? Yeah. Marcia was there at the beginning, but she seems to have gone off the screen. Let's see.
She's actually showing us Mercy, Finn. I don't know if she can.
Mercy.
Here is Marcia. Marcia is Mercy, but she doesn't seem to be able to. Can you hear us? Something funny going on with the sound here.
Can you hear us at all, Mercy?
What do we do about this? I'll send her a message in WhatsApp.
Yeah, because if we can't get Marcy at this point, we can bring you in later in the course of the meeting.
I think maybe
Okay.
that's...
hold on.
Oh, we got a response. You there, Marcy?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Okay. So, Marcy, I've
Okay.
just introduced you there as a representative of the workers in the mining industry in Namibia and the experiences you're going through yourself at the hands of the brutal employer, the Chinese company, with the assistance of the state and police forces in Namibia. So if you explain that, your experience in more detail, Marcia, and tell us about the Solidarity campaign and the financial appeal. We'll devote about 10 minutes to questions and answers and discussion about the issue of the Namibian mine and the importance of solidarity action. So, Marcia, there you go.
Okay. Greetings to all the comrades present. I would also like to thank the WIN comrades for giving me the privilege to be part of this meeting. Without wasting any time, let me quickly introduce myself. I am Marcia Kawashitosha, a former employee of Eagle Nightwatch, contracted at Reserve Mine, Namibia, about 60 kilometers from Swakopmund, where I am located. I am employed as a CCTV operator for 7 years. Now, this is with Eagle Nightwatch. Now, on September the 19th, 2023, that is last year. However, after a few attempts of engaging with our employer, whereby they always refused to sit down with us and hear our grievances, we demanded the Equity Commissioner to arrange a meeting with us, the employees, himself, the Equity Commissioner and the employer. And like usually the employee didn't show up. We explained our grievances to the Equity or the Employment Equity Commissioner, especially on the fact that they lied in the employer lied in the equity or in the affirmative action report, which they submitted to the Equity Commissioner yearly. Now, because of we actually spoke to the Equity Commissioner and forced him to arrange a meeting between us and the company. And on that specific date, the employer refused to show up. They refused to show up simply because they said we are sitting with a union representative or with a union that they did not acknowledge. That was the AR at the moment. So since they didn't show up at that meeting, we went on, we give our grievances to the Equity Commissioner, and then he proceeded ahead and he had that separate meeting with the employer. Now, because of the frustrations, the weight that was on top of us, we went to the media, we expressed our operations. I was given mandated by my former employees to say or to speak on their behalf. So I spoke and I expressed our operations to the media. And later on, the end of the month, October, I was suspended from work because I went to the media. I spoke on behalf of the employees. I said exactly what was happening. They suspended me for that reason. And then I went on. I had a hearing. My hearing was postponed. Imagine from October the 30th up to this year, January the 19th is the only date that I had to sit for my hearing. They hold my findings. It took me about 4 months to get my findings. Now, what happened is that before the company decided to give my findings, I lodged a case with the employment commissioner. I lodged the case on April the 16th. Only after April, the company decided, or maybe the fact that I lodged the case, it triggered them to the extent that they decided, okay, now they will come back to me, they will talk to me, they decided, okay, Masha, now because you misbehaved while on suspension, we withhold your findings. However, you were found not guilty, but because of the misbehaving while on suspension, we give you other new charges. They gave me new charges, and then it went so fast that it was like something that was planned. They eventually dismissed me in June this year. Yeah, and I appealed. I joined forces with the international activists. They also appealed on my behalf. I appealed this side, and then they dismissed my appeal. Now, with the case, coming back to this case that I lodged with the Equity Commissioner, we went for conciliation. The company denied everything. So now we have to go for arbitration on the 8th. Okay, now let me quickly, after getting dismissed on June, I opened another case for unfair dismissal and unfair labor practices. I opened another case, and up to now, I'm still waiting for a conciliation date, which I'm now also confused why they haven't. It's been 2 months now. I'm still waiting for this date. So I believe they are now busy, like they know there's another case ongoing. Now here I'm opening another case. So I believe somehow, the commissioner, either the commissioner is also siding with this company. That's why they're now holding my other case. Maybe first they want to finalize this case before giving attention to my dismissal case. I don't understand why they're holding or why they're not giving me a date for conciliation with my dismissal case. But however, we are proceeding with the case. In this case, I lodged it with other 23 employees of Equal Night Watch. We are actually focusing on the AA report. They used to write statements, or they used to give statements in the AA report that doesn't reflect in reality, stating that they're giving us medical aid, they're giving us benefits that they don't actually give us. So we also, there's a system whereby on every now and then where the security officers, they get an increasement. So now, since 2017, there was an increasement of $10 rate, but then this company, where Eagle Night Watch never gave us this $10 rate. So we are also fighting for that back pay. Since 2017, they only started giving us the $10 rate in 2022. So we are also fighting for a back pay for that, in this case that we launched. And now, this coming 8th November, we want to be prepared. Now, what happened is most of the employees have lost, not that they have lost, they have been demoralized by the company. They have been demoralized with things like the company is like threatening them that they will lose their jobs if they join unions, things like that. So, and also victimizing those that are wise or that knows their rights. They are being victimized, and with those victimizations, these employees are refraining from joining unions, which is now actually the challenge that we are sitting with. Employees are refraining from joining unions because they believe that they will lose their jobs and so on. And what we want is, but I think that we can actually change that situation just by educating the workers of their rights, of their constitutional rights, the Labor Act rights. So before the 8th of November, my plan, or we actually brought up a plan of action, which I also already shared with the union, with the WIN comrades and some other comrades. And we want to work on that plan. But for that plan to be executed, I want to appeal to the comrades to assist us with funds. And besides the plan of the 8th of November, we also have plans or ideas of starting and opening a branch in Swakopmund, where I am located. Okay, the whole idea is so that I am able to work in this office, and then it's also a job opportunity for me. And so we also want the international activists to stand in solidarity on the 8th of November, because on this date, we are not fighting an individual fight. We are actually fighting a fight for everyone. So we also believe that a change to one is a change for all. So fighting for one person is actually how should I say it? It's actually, we are not fighting for one person or for one company. We are fighting for everyone in this case. So basically, I want to appeal financially so that we can execute this plan. I've also forwarded a budget for this plan. I also forwarded it already to the WIN comrades, and I hope they will share it with everyone else. Yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Marcia, and you've shown immense courage and determination in taking on not just the employer, but the legal system and the state forces and the police. There's information about the bank account on the WIN website, and also information about the November the 8th demonstration against the Chinese company, which involved turning up at Chinese embassies. So the information about the dispute itself will also be on the WIN website. So unless there's a very urgent and important immediate questions, we'll proceed to the discussion.
I would like to add.
Okay, Steve, I see your hand there. So we'll take Steve in a minute, and then I don't see any other hands up. Okay, Steve, go ahead there.
Okay, thanks for the report, Marcia, and thanks to WIN to have this discussion. So we are supporting this International Day of Action on the 8th. And one of the things that we have to understand is that the Chinese state company, which owns the Husab mine, according to the workers, has basically captured the Namibian Labor Commission and the government, the SWAPO government. So we have supported this call and are urging rallies and pickets at all Chinese and Namibian consulates and embassies with letters, statements at these embassies and consulates. That would have a direct impact on the government of China and Namibia, because basically there's been very little publicity internationally about the capture of Namibia by mostly Chinese companies. It's not an issue internationally. So if comrades in other countries can have some kind of action, speak out in front of their consulate or embassy, take video, make statements, we can add that together to show that this is an international campaign support for the workers of Namibia, and that would be, I think, very valuable and important.
Thank you, Steve. So don't forget to take note of the financial bank account details, and to take note of the November the 8th demonstrations at the Chinese embassies by activists within the labor movement. So good luck. Good luck to you, and Wynne expresses his solidarity with you and the campaign that you represent. And like you said, it's not just one person, it's the working class internationally who have been assaulted in this particular case. So we shouldn't just focus on the single company. An injury to one, as we say, is an injury to all. So thanks again, Marcia, for your opening contribution. And I hope there'll be responses coming through on the information which we've supplied on the website.
Okay, thank you, comrades.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
thanks again, Marcia. So with that, we'll proceed to the discussion on Palestine. Now, the situation in Palestine, of course, is very, very immediate, and it's so well documented night after night on the television. People can see the slaughter, the genocide in Gaza, and now the extension to the mass killings that are happening in the Lebanon. The situation is getting worse by the day. Now there's the exchange of fire between Iran and Israel. There's 42,000 known dead already in Gaza. The figure is probably far higher than that. 1/3 of those are women and children. And lots of people, the bodies have not yet been found. Lots of people have been killed. Now there's killings happening all the time in the Lebanon, although the Lebanese government is trying to do a deal at the present time with the Israeli government. So all this will be explained and developed in the meeting, and people can ask questions. Something that's also worth noting is that the colonial background to the situation, it didn't come out of the blue. The Ottoman Empire from the 17th century on to the World War I controlled the Arab-speaking world in various ways. They were then replaced principally initially after World War I by the French and the British, who divided up the region to spheres of influence that they could have an impact on. Lebanon, Syria going to France, Mesopotamia, Jordan going to Britain, and so on. And then, of course, Britain getting the mandate over the area known as Palestine. So a discussion of the Middle East, a discussion of Israel, will take into account that I myself visited the West Bank some years back, and we saw all the main organizations had formed. It was a trade union delegation. So we met groups like Salem, Peace Now, the Breaking the Silence, various organizations representing Palestinians. We visited we stayed in Bethlehem. We also visited the East and West Jerusalem, and we were in the refugee camps speaking to people there. We also visited one of the settlements and had a discussion with some of the settler occupiers up there, and of course they have a great notion of themselves. They think they're supplying work for Palestinians on their own land. We also saw the devastation that's been caused to Palestinians right across the West Bank. Farmers don't have access to their crops. They have to go around about trips to get there. Homes have been destroyed. Property has been destroyed by settlers with the IDF standing by. Situation is getting worse by the day, and 2/3 of what was supposed to be an independent Palestine type of initial settlement, which was to have discussions later about nationhood, 2/3 of that area is controlled directly by the Israeli government. Now, I'm quite sure that these issues will be dealt with when Elaine Bradley speaks. Now, Elaine Bradley is, we're fortunate to have Elaine as our speaker tonight. Elaine is a human rights activist. She's an academic scholar. an organizational consultant. She worked in Palestine amongst the Palestinians, mainly in Gaza, and projects on social justice, human rights, and she worked with organizations such as Medical Aid for Palestine and the Centre for Human Rights and the Union of Agricultural Committees. She taught in Trinity College in Dublin and is a founder of the group known as Academics for Palestine. So with that, Elaine, you can begin your contribution, and if there are questions or further contributions, we'll take them after Elaine has spoken, and there'll be a chance to come back and develop points as they emerge in the discussion. How much time do you think you might require, Elaine, for your contribution?
I was working on about 20 minutes, if that's okay.
That's fine. So I'll give you a reminder in around 20 minutes. Okay, so.
Yeah, I could speak for less as well. I'm aware that there's probably quite a bit of knowledge and experience in the room already, so I don't want to be telling you something you already know. What I'm going to do is talk about the narration of Palestine historically and into the present moment. And I'm going to speak through my experience of being there. Obviously, colonialism is a huge part of it. We need to look at the framework of colonialism. And I think a really big question is, where are we now in this present moment? I believe we're in a very dangerous... Sorry?
Can you
I'm
mute?
hearing somebody else.
I can't hear any of this. So I don't know what there's a problem.
Somebody just unmuted for a minute. Just carry on, Elaine.
Okay.
Sorry, Elaine, just
so
continue.
I'm going to... Yeah, I'm going to speak from my own experience, but I want to then maybe to discuss where are we today, where are we in this present moment. I just need to give you the heads up. I'm in the room with my mother, who's 93 and who has Alzheimer's. I'm her carer. She's sitting quietly, but she might try and join into the meeting. And so if you see me rattling her to the floor, you'll know what's going on. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So I first went to Palestine in 2012. I went for 3 months. I was invited by Raji Sarani of the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights to go in my capacity as an organisational consultant. I was going to help them put certain frameworks in place and help them with their work, particularly around communications. I thought I was going to go and sort of tick that off my list of things to do, self-actualisation, Western woman, goes to Palestine, and then I was coming back to do a PhD. And when I got there, what I saw straight away, there was nothing prepared me for what I saw. I was in Gaza. And obviously, since then, I couldn't walk away. I haven't walked away, and I've stayed connected ever since. Things like PCHR, which is the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights, what it does is it documents crimes. And so some of the crimes that you're seeing today on your screens have been ongoing, maybe just not at the scale that we're seeing them today. But I remember one such crime where there was a 13-year-old boy called Mamoun who was out playing soccer, having a picnic with his elderly parents, and he was killed in a drone strike, and his parents ended up having to pick up pieces of his body and put them into a plastic bag. When that happened, the first response from Israel was, we didn't do it. It wasn't us. We'll investigate. So the international media who covered the story sort of had this big question mark over, was it Hamas? Was it a rocket misfire? All these things. Basically, evidence was gathered, the piece of the drone was found, and there was conclusive evidence that it was indeed Israel. It was a drone strike, and they'd killed a child who was playing football, having a picnic. But obviously by then the world's media had moved on. And that was just one example of so many that PCHR was documenting. While I was there, there was what's called escalation. So they're not actually considered offensives. They're sort of mini offensives. So Israel would bomb nightly for 2 weeks at a time. They'd kill people, they'd kill civilians. I had the strange distinction of being able to know the difference between, you know, naval shelling and Apache helicopter shelling because it was happening all around. I was living in a building with the UN flag on the top of it, where the UN services, where their personnel were based. So I always myself felt very safe. And then the other thing I suppose I want to say is during my time with PCHR, then and subsequently, because it's an Indigenous Palestinian organisation, I wasn't constrained the way other international aid workers are. I didn't have to live in a compound. I got out and walked about. I jumped in taxis in and out. And what I found was the most incredible hospitality and kindness shown towards me. I always felt safe. So if I go back to my point about narration, seeing the depiction of Palestinians in Gaza in the international media, in contrast to my lived experience of it, it was just unrecognisable. It shocked me the way international media would basically parrot Israel's talking points. So they would say, you know, this happened, if they're quoting the IDF, that, you know, it was very defined, whereas it was Hamas have claimed that, you know. So the way the language was used, one was very positive and affirming that the IDF were beyond any questioning about the legitimacy of their claims, that they wouldn't lie, that this couldn't be possible. And then everything that Hamas does has to be questioned. And we're seeing that today. You know, we hear about the, you know, Hezbollah, Iran-sponsored Hezbollah, or the Hezbollah enclaves that they're bombing, and it turns out to be orphanages in Lebanon. When the figures of the dead are given in Gaza, it's, you know, from the Hamas, you know, department, or whatever the language is. Again, it's always putting a question mark and questioning it. And it comes to how the whole thing is being narrated. And basically, Palestinians are not allowed to narrate their own truth. They're not to be trusted, and probably are given to lies and exaggeration, whereas Israelis are people like us, and what they say is the truth. So if I fast forward a little bit then to my studies, I came back and I was so shocked by what I'd seen there, and I was absolutely convinced that what I was witnessing was a genocide. Because if you look at genocide, not the kind of genocide that happened with the Holocaust, or the genocide we can see that is happening now, that's connected to large numbers of people being murdered. The Genocide Convention also defines genocide as the sort of removal of the basic means to live. And what we were seeing was in Gaza was a siege of Gaza. We were seeing aquifers that had been overpumped when settlers lived there, that were filled with saline water. We were seeing a population with a really high level of kidney disease due to nitrates in water, dependent on dialysis in hospitals where there was no continuous supply of electricity, where Israel was shutting off the electricity. And what we looked at was that every direction you looked, there was a report about Israel's actions. So one of them that came out while I was there one time was what was called the Red Lines Report, where Israel calculated the calorific needs of people in Gaza, men, women, and children, what they needed to survive, and then allowed less than that to come in. So, and they talked about putting Gaza on a diet. They were sort of factoring in that food comes in through the tunnels, but as an occupying power, Israel has, under international law, a responsibility for the people, for the health and the well-being of the people it occupies, and that's never really discussed. Israel's responsibility as an occupying power, and Israel is an occupying power in Gaza. That's been established by the UN. You no longer need boots on the ground. The technologies they have now, where they can monitor, they can control. You know, that they've got boundaries in the sea that they'll shoot and kill fishermen who go out beyond a certain, 3 miles, I think it is, limit. You don't need to have troops there. So this was just one aspect of it. Every aspect of life was being controlled. And as I said, Gaza was being put on a diet, and not just that, but a starvation diet back then. If you think of the Great March of Return, where people in Gaza went to the fence, they were looking for their right to return to their homeland. 80% of the population of Gaza are refugees for what is today Israel. Again, international law, refugees have a right of return, and that's never been allowed. And I'm sure most of you know about that. And it's all there to be read if you need to read up on it, and we can discuss it again. So they peacefully protesting what happened. How many of them killed? So many of them killed. Shot in the legs. There was a particular shot when I was there. I was there during the 2014 offensive, but I was in the West Bank, working with the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights. I was meant to be in Gaza, and the offensive began before I got there. So I was liaising with the hospitals, and what the medical teams were telling me is that the snipers in Israel have perfected a shot where there's a place on a leg where you'll sever an artery, you'll sever a nerve, and you'll shatter a bone. You'll do such damage that you can't actually feel the damage that's been done, and it leads to, with one shot, if they get it right, it will lead to an amputation of that leg. And that's what you were seeing during the Great March of Return. People being maimed. And then going back to life in Gaza, the number of people maimed and unable to fend for themselves anymore, reliant on the charity of others, is ever increasing. And it's an absolute nightmare for families of people who've been injured and maimed. And this is, again, it's ever increasing. At the moment, we're seeing children targeted with gunshot wounds to the head. So none of these things are accidental. I came back, as I said, and I changed the subject of my PhD. I called it Mapping Israel's Regime onto Frameworks of Genocide in Gaza. And what I found when I started to study was that genocide, it wasn't a new idea, and that the Palestinians themselves have been saying that Israel's been conducting a genocide there. Genocide looks very different. Say the genocide of the Native Americans under settler colonialism, the Native Americans, or in Australia or Tasmania, the genocide there looks very different from, say, the genocide of the Holocaust or the genocide of Rwanda that we associate with small time frames, many deaths over small time frames. And looking over time, if you draw the frame out, Ilan Pape called it the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, driving people out, but it continued beyond that, and it hasn't stopped. What I found through my research was the shutting down of discourse around these things, and a sort of contested discourses as well. And you see it very much in the media, you see it very much at the moment in whose truth. So if we go to the most recent offensive, the starting point is always given as the 7th of October 2023. But Palestinians will tell you that it started much further back than then. What starting the clock on the 7th of October does, firstly, if we look at what was narrated at that time, the number of deaths, the horrific deaths, mass rapes, beheaded babies in the oven, women with their breasts cut off, and men playing football with women's breasts. This was the narrative that got out. And I have to say, even I balked. Even I, who would be a strong supporter of Palestine and Palestinian resistance, balked at it. What's come to light since then was that so much of what was being said is not true. So much of that has been debunked, like the mass rapes, like the beheaded babies and the babies in the oven, the the death of children. But it's functioned to mobilize political will for what we're currently seeing for the Israelis to go into Gaza and commit absolute atrocities at a scale, that whoever would thought we'd be seeing this in our lifetime. Seeing pictures of people being burned in hospital beds, babies, the decomposed bodies of neonatals in hospital beds, abandoned in hospitals, doctors and nurses rounded up with tape around their hands. But it's like the horse is bolted, that everything, if you go to the media, everything is, but do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? So I just want to press pause on all those things I've said for the moment and just come back to the idea of narration. Edward Said, after the atrocities in Lebanon in the 80s, wrote a pamphlet, Permission to Narrate, and basically was saying that Palestinians aren't allowed to narrate their own experience, and how that works in the international media. And I would have to say that's absolutely true, that they're not listened to, they're not believed. Going to Judith Butler, an academic, she talks about grievable and ungrievable life. What we're seeing is that Palestinian life in the international discourse is ungrievable life. It doesn't have the same weight as an Israeli child. That the media is so inured to the deaths of brown people, and where we might have some concessions made in the direction sympathy towards Palestinians, it's to women and children. It doesn't include Palestinian men as well. So where does that bring us today? It's very interesting to see now that the BBC, that they're saying 100 of the staff have signed anonymously a letter about their presentation of the situation in Palestine. But for any of us observers who have been watching for a long time, we know that what's been told is lies, are lies, and the misrepresentation. So as somebody who's been an activist now since 2012 on the rights of the Palestinian people, and as you said in the introduction, the founder of Academics for Palestine, I was always very careful. I was always very worried. You don't want to be accused of being an anti-Semite. I used to quote, I worked with Elaine Bradley, who I would still very much admire his work. But, finding Jewish comrades to work with as almost a shield against the accusation of anti-Semitism. And if you look at what that does, and I'm talking about myself, I'm not talking about my Jewish comrades, what that does is it means that we can only speak our truth if we use a Jewish person as a reference point. What about if we spoke to a Palestinian? And inevitably we do get called anti-Semites no matter what we do. So I think there's a point where we just have to suck all that stuff up. But when we see situations, say, with the campus occupations in the States where, and I want to obviously make, I know that most of you are aware of this, the distinction between Zionism and Judaism. And I think that that a few things have been held hostage, and the truth is a big part of what's been held hostage, but also Judaism has been held hostage, that Zionism is an ideology. I really welcome the finding in the David Miller case that it's a political ideology, and it's within our rights to critique it, and actually oppose it. I think I believe it's a racist ideology. And I believe it needs to be dismantled. And I think there are many Jewish people as well saying the same things. But to equate Judaism with Zionism is itself, I would believe, anti-Semitic. But going back to the campus protests in the States, where people are saying they feel threatened because of a watermelon sign or somebody had kafir. You're seeing in Germany people being arrested for having Palestine flags. These are the very, very dangerous times that we're living in. And I truly mean it. If you look at the States, what's happening now, people are arguing. People I'd admire, like Mehdi Hassan, is talking about, Kamala Harris as the lesser of two evils. What does that mean? What does that mean? Somebody who still supports genocide? I feel that these are false dichotomies. They're false dichotomies. We're given these choices that aren't choices at all. And we're at a watershed moment. So we have the Labour Party in the UK. I was a member and I have left, following the expulsions of so many of my comrades, and Keir Starmer's actions expelling pro-Palestinian activists within his own party, and particularly expelling Jewish pro-Palestinian activists. I think there hasn't been more Jewish people expelled from the Labour Party than under Keir Starmer. Do you know what I mean? In the name, and I know some of you will be able to speak to that. When a human rights lawyer can speak to camera and be asked a very direct question, is it acceptable to turn off water and electricity to the people of Gaza? And he says it is, and he cites self-defense, Israel's right to defend itself. Then we know we are in very dangerous grounds. So I suppose I've been talking for a long time and I've probably rambled all over the place, but I hope I've penned out a picture that we can start to talk about, because I feel we have to reclaim truth, we have to be brave, we have to face the slings and arrows, and we have to call out where we see it, what it is we're seeing. I believe we're being gaslit by governments, we're being gaslit by the media, we're being expected to deny, when we're being told that there are terror tunnels under Al Shifa Hospital, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and as I said, atrocities are being committed on that pretext. This is a really critical time. I'll finish on that for the moment, but maybe we can have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for a very, very interesting, very illuminating opening contribution. There's a number of points which you mentioned, which comrades might be able to focus in on. For instance, the distinction between anti-Semitism and opposing the actions of the Israeli government. It's perfectly valid to oppose the actions of the Israeli government like it is of any government. You don't have to be an anti-Semite to do so. In fact, interestingly, the Israeli ambassador in Ireland wrote a statement which I kept, it was reported in the Irish Times, in which she made that very point, that being critical of the Israeli government doesn't make you anti-Semite. Another point that you mentioned was Israel's responsibility to look after the populations of the countries they've occupied. They don't do that. So UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, took over that responsibility. And they're the ones which we all contribute to, who look after the social services, the health, the education, the relief, the camps. UNRWA does that. And then Israel decided last week at a vote in Parliament to refuse access to UNRWA employees to solve the problems of health, social welfare, education, and so on in the occupied territories, which they, as you explained, are responsible for. And another issue maybe the discussion might focus on is this dispute didn't come from nowhere. In 1948, as comrades are probably familiar, 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from Israel so the state could be established in such a way there'd be a majority in support of what became the Israeli Defense Force at the time. Other Haganah and Ergun, these other groups came together. But the Nakba, as it's described, was the beginning of this process, and the United Nations decided that refugees had the right of return, which Israel never accepted. And likewise, in 1967, there was a further hundreds of thousands of Palestinians expelled. And in fact, the ones that weren't expelled were living as refugees in their own homes. And it was known as the West Bank. So there's lots of issues which you brought out, Elaine, and we could focus on in the discussion, or any other question any comrade wants to bring up. And you'll have an opportunity to come back in and to develop points into discussion. Now, if comrades wish to speak, could they use the electronic hand, which I can see straight away, or if they prefer to be waving their arms around on the screen, well, that's okay as well. So can comrades now, usually in these discussions, there's a bit of a rush at the end. So if you want to make a contribution, now is the time to indicate. So we have two already. We've got Carol and then Matthew. Okay, Carol, you're on.
Well, besides being called an anti-Semite, Jews are, and this is true of the United States, because I think the majority of the Jewish population is against the war, against the massacre, I should say, not being a war. We're also hating Jews. So Zionism is a whipping post to keep people, you're right, it's an ideology to keep people in line to support Israel and Israeli capitalism. So I think the situation is more dangerous than ever. I mean, it's likely that Trump is going to be president on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, whenever the count is. But if he's not, then he's going to contest it. And already there have been ballot boxes that were burnt in Washington state. So these guys have some practice at beating people. They're fascists, the people that the Proud Boys and that support Trump. So there's a good chance that there's going to be a lot of violence in the United States come next week. I think that, unfortunately, and let me just say, the Arab countries have done nothing also in terms of defending. So it's, Israel is genocidal, but these Arab countries have fallen in line. None of them are doing anything to protect the Palestinians. And when they say we're abandoned, they mean that sincerely, in a place where there are millions of other Arabs that would like to go out and support them. But, the real problem in the United States is the trade union bureaucrats, because whenever anybody brings up a resolution, mine included, essentially immediately someone will get up and say, let's call the question, which means there's no discussion whatsoever. And so I just recently wrote a resolution that I'm sending down to my union, because not only is the IHRA, which the new, definition of anti-Semitism being pushed on us, but I work for the city university. The chancellor of the city university has essentially accepted that definition too, which means that, you can't be prejudiced against Blacks and Latins, but Israel is the one country that was singled out. You can't be as anti-Israeli. And so I'm sending a resolution with no expectations that it's going to be supported by the bureaucracy, because essentially they're the ones that are keeping people in check in the United States. So people want to do things and have to, and in fact, I brought it to my union last week, to the chapter that I work at, and this guy, the Zionist, said, well, I don't understand why you're bringing it to the union. And people by and large don't see unions as being working class institutions that are supposed to have a social program, not just get me some more money or get me fewer hours or something. There's no idea. So we had a conversation about that, about why unions, because we have the power to strike. We can shut this shit down. If the Longshore decided they weren't going to send arms anymore, that would be the end of the war. So the working class has to be educated, especially here in the United States, but has to be pushed to organize strikes and to down tools if they're being asked to send, weapons to Israel to murder people. And really the crux of this, because we've had demonstrations with thousands and thousands shutting down Grand Central Station, hundreds of thousands of people in Washington. The working class has the power to do this. And we have to keep pushing that continuously, that workers need to take the lead here to shut it down. Because what's happening internationally is happening, domestically as well. That's it.
Thank you, Carol. It's a very important point. Before we take the next speaker, I just want to clarify with Elaine. If it's okay with you, Elaine, we'll take a few contributions, and then you can come back and answer a kind of a batch, and then we'll take from there. Is that okay with you?
It would be, but could I get back to Carol? There's a lot there you said, Carol. I'm totally with you all the way. Greg Philo in the Glasgow Media Group wrote a book about bad news from Israel and more bad news from Israel. And what they found is, from watching the media, people didn't know who was the aggressor and who, was the victim. And if you look at the media at the moment, Palestinians die, Israelis are killed, And this is what happens, there's a lot you'll see on social media, people saying, who killed them? Tell us who killed them. Who bombed the hospital? They'll say a hospital was bombed. It's so, what's the word? It's made so obtuse and so opaque. And ordinary people who rely on standard media for their information don't know what's going on. And I'm often really flabbergasted by how ignorant people are on the issue. I think I totally am with you. This is a workers' issue. What's happening, if we allow these things, are the institutions that we've entrusted to uphold international law and human rights are failing. Our governments are failing. They're complicit in the most terrible crime. And if we allow this to happen, and I hate saying it because I don't think the reason we should change things is because we could be next. I think that's the wrong reason. We should be saying, we stop this, it's wrong. But it's like, where does it stop? Where, if it's okay to bomb hospitals, if it's okay to kill doctors, summary executions by drones, the beepers blowing people's eyes out, it's just like, where does it end? Where are we? And I think there's a huge campaign of education that has to be done. We have to mobilise. This is a workers' issue. And I just to go back as well, what you said, I feel the need to preface what I'm going to say by saying I am not saying that Israel is behind all this international capitalism. It is a cog in a wheel of international capitalism. It's it's a key part of the military industrial complex. It is, we set up Ronald Storrs back at the turn of the last century, talked about it being as a loyal little Jewish Ulster in a sea of hostile Arabs. Israel is serving a function for Western capitalism, and see how our governments, the lengths that they're going to cover. And even in Ireland, where we're seen as being very good and very pro-Palestinian, our government are absolutely sitting on the fence. In terms of the Occupied Territories Bill, they're sitting on the fence. We found out that we're having planes flying in within our international airspace, taking weapons to Israel. This is all happening, and they're doing very, very little. They are afraid that because we're all playing into this system. The system is so rotten, but you're right, it's absolutely dangerous. And I think workers, there's a class aspect to this. We have to defeat capitalism. I think we have to dismantle Zionism. But they're all entwined. How do we do it? But thank you for that. I totally agree with everything you said.
Yep. Thanks, Elaine. So we have a succession of speakers here. I'll read out the order. Matthew, followed by Steve, followed by Roger, followed by Eric, followed by Dominic. But before the comrades speak, can I just remind them to be concise and restrained in their contributions because of the number of speakers who wish to contribute. So if you could limit your question or contribution to, I don't know, let's say 3 or 4 minutes, not to go beyond that, then we'll see how the discussion then takes off from there. If comrades take up too much time, then there's less for everybody else, and there's less time to develop arguments and to go into the more detail of the points. So the next speaker is Matthew.
Oh, yeah, thank you, comrades. No, it's a very useful discussion and very appropriate at the time. I mean, the key here actually, of course, is this is the system of imperialism, which of course is dominated by the US, which effectively runs the system. But at the point, as people can see, the whole thing's falling apart. So therefore, it becomes very, very dangerous. I mean, we can see that, in fact, of course, what is, quote, media, of course, has now been revealed itself as essentially a third-rate propaganda operation, and is operating, in order to try and cover the system and the sort of brutality that is going on. There's no real bones about it, and therefore, I think that the other thing about this, of course, is that we do stand in the debt of Palestinian journalists. I mean, I think that this war is different because it's different to, say, the Iraq War, which obviously huge numbers of people were also killed by the imperialists, in the fact that you have a bunch of people who have spent their time, who have the facility and the courage to try and put everything they can out there while risking everything, that their lives, their families, the whole lot, in order to put truth in front of the world, which is an enormous thing. And has actually said, demonstrated exactly what this is for everybody, and has reduced obviously the name of Israel to dirt, which is where it should be in front of the population of the world. And I think that that is really important. The other thing, of course, is it's quite clear that as our politicians are all imperialists and are all wedded to the system, that of course they're all monsters, because this to them, I mean, you look at the likes of Starmer and these people, they don't blink an eye at it. They don't care. I mean, how much killing there is, or how much brutality. That's normal business. And that's a warning. I mean, you may say, okay, well, they won't necessarily do it to us, but it doesn't mean that the point is that they're quite prepared to. They don't care. They are quite prepared to do this to anybody. It doesn't matter, and we should draw that really sharp conclusion in those terms. So we need to be campaigning against these people because they're dangerous. They're prepared to do this, and that's the way it works. The other thing that's important here, and being brief, is that they're losing. I mean, the problem is that the IDF is clearly on the position now of losing on all the fronts that it's fighting. It can't actually cope with the resistance in Gaza. I mean, despite obviously being able to inflict horrible, these horrible casualties and so on and so forth, and killing loads of civilians, they're good at that. They can't cope with the resistance. The resistance is carried on. They can't. They've tried to invade Lebanon again. Obviously, they've inflicted horrible attacks on Lebanon, all entirely illegally. And as we say, the imperialist system has basically said, well, it doesn't give a monkeys about the law, its own laws, the international laws that it's written. The function of the system is far more important than anybody, any offence against life or law or whatever else. But it's failed in that. It's actually many observers are now saying that its recent effort to attack Iran, it actually failed in that too. So in those terms, there's for the Israeli government, of course, and the Israeli state itself, this is existential. And the thing is, obviously, then what we've got is all of the imperialists are determined to maintain that state if they possibly can. Hence the pledges by the likes of Starmer and so on, basically to continue supplying political support, weapons. The likes of the Germans to essentially pledging to continue. I mean, Scholz actually stood up and said, look, we will continue supplying weapons. We don't care. We need to maintain the state of Israel. But the question is really how do we build this movement against it? How is it we can be effective in terms of the fact we've seen millions, hundreds of millions of people on the street and so on protesting against this across the world, and we've seen some successes. And the question is, okay, how do we actually get to the point where we can actually overturn this thing? It actually links in, of course, obviously also to the war in Ukraine, but that's another question.
Matthew, can you
okay, right. So, but I think, as I say, imperialism is the key to this. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you, but I'm trying to encourage.
No, fine.
Steve Zelser, you're the next speaker.
I think that we have to put this in the context of the decline of U.S. imperialism, the desperation of U.S. imperialism. This is connected to the adventurism of the United States fighting wars on 3 continents, and we are going towards a world war. The genocide of the Palestinians is part and parcel of what imperialism is doing. And I think that the union bureaucracy is part and parcel of that. I mean, this book by Elaine Bradley, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic, I think we need to bring that to workers and trade unions in Britain and the United States to explain why our unions are supporting this genocide. It's not just the government. The union bureaucracy is part and parcel of supporting Zionism. They say that they're Zionists, and they purged anti-Zionists from the unions and prevent them from actually building a movement against, a workers' movement against the genocide. So I think that that's critical. And I think that the one critical point is the connection of workers' struggles in the United States, Britain, anywhere with the fight against imperialist war. Because business unionism in the United States says there's a separation between our struggle for a contract or wages with the fight against war, against genocide. And I think the task of revolutionaries is to connect those struggles and tie them together, that the fight against this genocide and war is part and parcel of their daily struggle. There haven't been actions by massive unions. There have been some small actions by Greek workers or Italian workers, but the unions have allowed the genocide to go on, the union bureaucracy, because they prevented a mobilization of the unions. The Transport Workers Federation, ITF, has refused to do anything. There are still Zim ships going in Britain. Zim ships, Zionist ships are delivering and moving cargo in Britain. Same in Australia. And why is that? Why is that? It's because the union bureaucracy are supporting the Zionist regime. And they have prevented a direct action and a campaign in the unions for direct action. I think those are the issues that we have to bring up politically, but it means a fight against, obviously, this counter-revolutionary, reactionary trade union bureaucracy. That's critical.
Thank you, Steve. So our next speaker is Roger. You're still muted there, Roger.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you're okay now.
Sorry about that. Well, first of all, I agree with everything that Comrade Elaine and Matthew and Steve have said. I'd just like to add a few more points really in support of what they're saying. First of all, I think what's different about this war or this genocide that is taking place is that these killings are not. I mean, there've been maybe more people killed in the Vietnam War and Iraq, maybe another. But the point is that those killings were not as collateral to other objectives. In this case, extermination of the Palestinian people is actually a war aim. It's actually the purpose and the motive of the Israeli regime, and that is something horrifying. That's something where you'd have to go back. All right, maybe. There was the Tutsis in
Rwanda.
Sorry,
Rwanda.
Thank you. But you'd have to go back to the genocide of the Second World War. You'd have to go back to the concentration camps, to the Holocaust, to see anything really comparable. Now, how and why is this allowed, though, by the regime, by the ruling class in the USA and of Europe? Why is that happening? Because it's almost it's something which can only be explained by, as Steve said, it's a policy of the ruling class. It's a policy of the ruling class in a period where they're preparing for a world war. I'm not saying tomorrow, but they're preparing in the period ahead for a war, for whether USA or China is going to rule the world and rule world trade and production. And part of that is to defeat, a completely demoralized defeat, a complete body blow to the Arab Revolution. And that fits in with their plans. I'm not sure whether we can say that this was actually designed or prepared or planned by the US ruling class, but I think they exploit it very readily and very willingly because it suits their interests so well. But what this has done has given a completely new lease of life to anti-Semitism. First of all, we had, of course, it was anti-Semitism was already growing in Britain when it was when the question was that weapon was deployed in relation to smear Jeremy Corbyn and the leftward move that was taking place in the British Labour movement. But this particularly has absolutely thrown complete poison into the whole debate, and I'm afraid to say that it has created confusion and terrible blunders and dangerous blunders within the left as well. I see so many comments on Facebook by people claiming to be lefts and socialists and so on, which is absolutely diabolically anti-Semitic and absolutely monstrous, complete misunderstanding of the whole situation. Even somebody, I shouldn't say, I'm not going to name the name, but somebody who was a regular attender at these meetings of Win, who used to boast that he would come week after week after week. I joked with him once that we should give him a loyalty card because he was such a regular participant in our meetings. And I've seen stuff that he's put on Facebook, and I've had arguments with him on Facebook, which is absolutely horrific, absolutely hair-raising. The idea that the USA is ruled by the Zionists. That's really it's almost close to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. The idea that there's a worldwide Jewish conspiracy which somehow has a completely decisive effect and controls and manipulates the governments and the ruling classes of the world. It's a ridiculous idea. Why would the world's mightiest imperialist state submit to arbitrary rule by any secondary regional power? On the contrary, the ruling class of the USA cynically and hypocritically uses Zionism as a strategic means of maintaining a diplomatic and military presence in a key oil-rich region. An over-aggressive guard dog might occasionally exceed its owner's immediate wishes. It nevertheless remains the property of its owner. And the influence of the Zionists, whether Jewish or Christian, ultimately depends on the material, economic, and military interests of the American ruling class. The tail doesn't wag the dog. We have to beware of falling prey to irrational conspiracy theories, because the idea of Zionism was considered to be a crank idea, completely treated as a joke in the ghettos before the Holocaust. The position of the mass organization of the Jews in Eastern Europe, which in the ghettos, that is the Bund, their position was, we're going nowhere, this is our home. They completely rejected the reactionary and defeatist ideology of Zionism. The idea of Zionism had been cleverly exploited by the anti-Semite, by the way, Balfour, Prime Minister or Foreign Secretary Balfour, in the time of the First World War, in his negotiations with the French on how to divide up the Ottoman Empire in such a way as to keep out the Jews, because, by the way, Balfour was the architect of the 1905 Aliens Act, which was an anti-Semitic act to stop Eastern European Jews fleeing the ghettos and coming to Britain and to America. And it was also, of course, to keep hold of the sea route to India, to protect the oil fields, and to quell the Arab Revolution. And it only, but these ideas only gained substance among Jews as a direct consequence of the Holocaust. Because, well, at the time of the Holocaust, at the time of the end of the Second World War, there were still hundreds of thousands of Jews, even though millions had been wiped out. There were hundreds of thousands of Jews who were still completely displaced persons. They were in the displaced persons camps. In effect, they were in concentration camps for years after the end of the Second World War, because they had nowhere else to go. They couldn't return to their former homes. They, where they'd been, subjected to persecution. Can you imagine that Jews who'd been who'd been rounded up and put in the concentration camps and coming back and knocking on the doors of their houses and saying, right, we're back now, get out, we want our houses back. There's no way, they had nowhere to go. It's not a defense of Zionism, but it's a reason why Zionism, it's not surprising that it began to get a certain currency. And for the first time, in other words, Zionism was established as a serious project among Jewish people. So it was not an age-old, sinister, secret Jewish conspiracy, but the Zionism was, when it got any currency, was a devious political project that only gained substance as the direct consequence of the Holocaust. And by the way, all this talk, which I won't say much more. I'm sorry, I'm taking time. But one point I do want to make: there's a lot of talk in the Facebook chatter, if you like, about proving that the Jews don't have any genetic connection with the ancient land of Palestine. Well, so what? That has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the issue. The question is, as a matter of fact, when Zionism, the project of Zionism, was first mooted, it was not only related to a return to some mythical homeland in the Middle East. Other territories in South America, in Africa, and so on were actually being considered as possible places where the Jews could make a homeland. The original founders of Israel were secular. So all this stuff about genetics, proving that the Jews never came from Palestine and so on, is completely irrelevant. Zionism was not an age-old, sinister, secret Jewish conspiracy, but as I say, a devious political project that only gained substance as a direct consequence of the Holocaust. So you could say, in a way, that it's yet another catastrophic consequence of the failure of the German Revolution of 1918 to 1923. All I would say finally is in relation to what kind of solution the entire region of North Africa, the Middle East, the whole region had been carved up at the end of the First World War by the French and the British, the so-called Sykes-Picot Plan. And as a result, all the lines that were drawn separating one country, one state from another, are completely artificial. Of course, Israel is an artificial state. Palestine was an artificial state. Jordan was all of them. Saudi Arabia, they're all artificial states because lines were drawn on the map, drawn on the sand, if you like, by foreign imperialists, carving up and dividing the region between them. So what is the answer? We've had, as a result of that, we've had massacres, not only this absolute horror in Palestine, but we've, of course, the whole region has been fraught with conflicts. There have been massacres in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, in Yemen, and so on. And what's the answer? Has to be for socialists, it has to be for a socialist federation of the entire Middle East, in which all the groups and all the sects and all the religions and all the identities can live in fraternity. Sorry, I went on too long, comrades.
Thank you, Roger. Very important points that Roger has made there. They're talking about previous massacres. There were 22,000 people killed in 1982 in the war between Israel and Lebanon. So this killing spree is not entirely new. That's an important point to bear in mind. It didn't come out of the blue. Now, the next comrade to speak is Eric.
Good morning, everyone. A hard act to follow, Roger. So I'll be brief. Thank you all for the contributions. I feel like, so I've been to a number of the demonstrations here in the U.S. in the San Francisco Bay Area, and just listening to the discussion here, I get concerned for the forest being missed for the trees, and I guess I feel the need to point a couple of things out. Of course, there's been a passing mention of Christian Zionism, which is enormous here in the United States. I grew up an evangelical Christian, and I grew up hearing what I now understand is Israeli propaganda in church. And that's not at all unusual, at all. So that's just a thing to consider. I share the concern that's been expressed about a certain. I don't think it generally has the sort of the ring of the fascist or older anti-Semitism, but there is an anti-Semitism among the left, and I find it really distressing. And that as segue into what I'm seeing happening here in the United States, and I think from listening to this discussion, the little snippets of things I see online, seems to be happening in other countries too, is the whole movement against Zionism, against the current ethno-state of Israel, has put itself behind a bunch of middle-class nationalist talking points. And I think it's just whole lock, stock, and barrel a mistake. Here in the United States, the talking point I've encouraged, I'm somewhat active in the DSA chapter here in the East Bay, and with the young activists that will listen to me, is the whole rhetoric is wrong. The $64,000 question, as has already been stated by a number of comrades here in the discussion, is the backstopping of the Israeli state by the US, and to a lesser degree the UK and Germany and others. Look, the talking point to the majority of the population, the majority of the working class, here is bring the troops home and stop being involved in other nations' conflicts. Do you want to speak more on that? You want to get into the history? I guess that's okay. I think you run the serious risk of going off course. Most American people I talk to, working class people, middle class people, their attitude is, ugh, the people in that part of the world have been fighting for centuries. Why are we involved in it? I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything. Of course, most of them get a steady dose of really nasty, bigoted, anti-Arab propaganda, etc. But I feel like insofar as any of us have influence on people that are around us, the movements we're in, I think some of us still work, most of us are retired, is that's the organizing theme. And the people there will take care of themselves. I believe, perhaps naively, that the vast majority of the Jews who live in Israel, the vast majority of the Arabs who live there, would be willing to live next door to each other and not kill each other. I think you've got Islamists and Zionists who have a hold of guns, and they drag the rest of the population into violence, deadly, horrible violence. Anyway, I get a little frustrated with how far that goes. You know, we remember what was the organizing, the big organizing meme of the Bolsheviks was land, bread, and peace. Like simple organizing concepts. And for us in the United States, at least, it's just end all militarism. It's really simple. Bring the troops home, stop involvement everywhere in the world. And every time I have that conversation with someone on the bus or in the store or one of my former coworkers, they all get it and they all agree. So anyway, thank you very much. And thank you, as always, for these discussions.
Thank you, Eric. Just before the next speaker, I should mention, it's come back to a point Roger made. We have to seek solutions, and the ultimate solution is unity of the working class across North Africa and the Middle East. Many countries of the Middle East have strong and rich labor and social traditions. Egypt, Lebanon, Israel itself, come back over the years. And we have to build a united working class movement to achieve socialism. And also maybe comrades could reference what's known as the Arab Spring, where mass movements in several countries, Tunisia, starting in Tunisia, but also in Egypt and Syria, in Iraq and Bahrain. In Egypt, there were two successive, one in 2011, again in 2013, mass movements of people, firstly against Mubarak, who was removed, and then later, after the election of Morsi, a movement against the attempt by Morsi to change the constitution led to Sisi coming to power, and that was a huge repression and a terrible reaction regime under Sisi, torturing and killing and imprisoning opponents. But nonetheless, it was a mass movement, principally in Tunisia, which we now know as the Arab Spring. So comrades, if they can devote some time to this question of what's the solution. There's agreement, obviously, in all the contributions so far, but maybe focus a little bit on how we're going to resolve this question. Ian or Dominic, sorry, not Ian, John or Dominic have indicated they want to speak next, followed by Alan.
John speaking.
Okay, John.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I'd just like to mention one or two things that have struck me. One, I watch a lot of Al Jazeera because it's the only channel really that concentrates on what's going on in Israel, Palestine. And one thing I like to hear is actually settlers speaking, because I think they let the cat out of the bag. That when the settlers speak, they make no bones about the fact that they want to see Palestine ethnically cleansed and, if you like, the expulsion of the Palestinian people. There was a time earlier in the conflict where there was active discussion on dropping an atom bomb on Gaza. And this was backed up not just by some nutcase settlers, but by members of the Knesset who, if you like, were representatives of these nutcase settlers. But you have the situation where, if you like, Israel wants to clear out the Palestinian people, but on the other hand, they want to have a situation where they have respectability in the world. But the settlers, if you like, are really upsetting the apple cart. There's virtually no news now coming out of the West Bank. But before the clampdown on what was going on in the West Bank came about, it was clear that the army and the settlers were actually ethnically cleansing the West Bank and driving more and more Palestinians out and creating conditions that made life really intolerable. The same as life has been made really intolerable in terms of Gaza, where disease and famine and, extreme thirst are used as weapons of war. And really, as far as Israel's concerned, they're getting nowhere, because what beats me when you do hear of things in the West, in Gaza, is that there was fighting going on. Well, Israel's supposed to have cleared out Hamas in all the areas of Gaza, but still they keep popping up. And as far as, if you like, internationally, you have a situation where there is real concern that over the next 20 years, you will have created such hatred in Palestine towards Israel and towards the West. Because, if you like, one of the major players as far as the Palestinians are concerned is genocide Joe Biden. He's provided them with huge amounts of really vicious weapons, huge bunker busting bombs, which have been used in villages now in Lebanon. You have a situation where, if you like, the Zionist movement or the Christian Zionist movement, if you like, look to the Bible, look to, well, the commandments. But Israel now, I think quite clearly, is breaking three major commandments. Thou shalt not kill, because what's going on in Gaza, particularly at the moment, is nightly bombing raids on tents and residential buildings, killing anything between 30 and 130 people a night. Thou shalt not rob, where we see the West Bank, where the Palestinian population has been driven out. And then thou shalt not lie. And as the speaker pointed out, you get the situation where Israel claims that any atrocity that has occurred is possibly the fault of the Palestinians, and that people then sort of pause to question. And then a few days later, Israeli says, oops, oh, sorry, that was one of our bombs. And quite frankly, you have, I think I'm accurate in saying this, you have Netanyahu threatening, if you like, his neighbours with Gaza as an outcome, if they come to the aid of the Palestinian people. And quite frankly, I think as far as the solution is concerned, it's really, in a way, to try and get a situation where obviously the trade unions begin to take an active role, a bit like they did at the end of the First World War, where you had, forget the name of the ship, was it the Jolly Roger or something in London, that was taking arms to the Russian reactionaries. And, you know, that was stopped by the dock workers in London, where it's absolutely clear that countries like Ireland that have taken a strong, at least on paper, stance in support of the Palestinians does not allow Shannon to become, if you like, a staging post for America to bring in billions of pounds worth of arms to Israel. And quite frankly, I think what's needed as well is to really have a handout, you know, a hand of friendship, which we do have, to those Jewish people who've taken a stance against Israel, not in my name, you know, where you have demonstrations where there is a contingent of Jewish people who make it quite clear that what's happening in Israel and Palestine is not in their names. I have a Jewish friend, and I asked her, was there any movement at all in mainstream Jewry in Britain to distance itself from Netanyahu, who in other circumstances will be regarded as a crook, you know, to distance Jewry from, if you like, the atrocities that are now being committed in Israel. And she said there was a movement, but it wasn't really a big one at the moment, but it seemed to be gathering traction. But again, on all the things, and I think it comes back to it, it's the trade unions that are the absolute key to any solving of the problem in Palestine, Israel. I'll leave it at that, comments.
Thank you, John. Alan Brack is our next speaker.
It's a while since I've been to a WIN meeting, and I'd just like to say it's good to be here, and also thank Elaine for her introduction and the comrades that have spoken during the meeting. I want to take just a slight, I mean, it's very, very brief and very small points, really. But the big one is that I get concerned when I go to meetings, whatever they are, at local Zooms, meetings. My partner was at a meeting yesterday where Jeremy Corbyn was speaking in Leeds, and the age group is very much our age group, and there's not enough young people involved. But I think a possible plus to even talk that way of what's going on at the moment is the engagement of young people, that actually people that we've got clearly before us now, that message of Rosa Luxemburg's 100 years ago of socialism or barbarism. And actually, I think that what's happening is truly barbaristic. It really is horrific what's happening in Gaza. But I also think that what's happening is that young people are finding ways into the struggle for a different kind of way of being. And I actually think that for all, you know, as I say, the absolute horrors of what is going on, that young people are turning up week after week. We regularly go to demonstrations in Leeds, Mandy more than me, but I get there when I can. And there are hundreds and hundreds of people, and many of them young people, young mothers with their children, people demonstrating. And I think the consciousness that is changing on that issue, the consciousness that the world is wrong, that the world isn't the world we want to live in, isn't to be underestimated. I would wish that this situation in Gaza wasn't happening in the West Bank also, and in Lebanon. But in actual fact, I think that we're looking at the beginnings of real kind of consciousness change for young people, for people of all ages, but particularly young people, to get involved. They're making banners, they're making placards, they're turning up week after week, and therein lies the hope that one issue leaps to another, that the Arab Spring that Roger referred to could well happen in this climate. And I hope that out of all that suffering that is going on, absolutely horrible situation, that actually the beginnings of a new kind of consciousness actually happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Now, before going to Elaine for a final summing up of the meeting and the points she wants to make in conclusion, are there other comrades who want to speak briefly? It has to be brief on other points, or to come in a second time. So the only indication I see is Steve. So after Steve, then we'll ask Elaine then to make summary points about the meeting that she wishes to, whatever point she wants to refer to. So after Steve, go ahead, Steve.
I think we have to look at the rise of fascism and what's happening in with the United States and the Zionists. The Zionists, as most of you probably know, collaborated with the fascists and the Nazis. In fact, the Nazis gave them an award. They brought Adolf Eichmann to Palestine. The rise of fascism is a serious factor. We're not talking about just Palestine and the Middle East. We're talking about the rise of fascism. And in the United States, there's a real danger of a fascist government. Now, how do people think that's going to change things if you have Trump as president of the United States? In our view, it's going to make a major political change. I mean, as far as the working class, they're going to arrest union leaders. They're going to bust unions and put them in trusteeship. We're facing a revolutionary situation, and the working class is not prepared for that. In Britain and most of the imperialist countries, the trade union bureaucracy has demobilized the working class. In Germany, in Britain, in France, the unions are not mobilizing against imperialist war, whether it's Ukraine or in the Middle East with Palestine, the genocide. This is a major political obstacle to fighting for the working class. And I think that's one of the things that we have to confront, you know, that this political obstacle, not that there isn't activism in the unions or activism, and thousands of trade unions in the United States are fighting for Palestine. They're being arrested at universities. There's a political struggle going on in the working class, and it's a militant section of the working class who want to fight and want to organize. But we have to, as Marxists, look at the class forces and the political role of the trade union bureaucracy, which is an obstacle and an albatross sitting on the working class. If we can't remove that, and workers are not able to go outside that, and we don't have mass working class organizations that are challenging that in most countries, then we have a political problem. We have a political vacuum. The fact that there's no working class party in the United States in this period, dangerous situation. The rise of fascism has greater penetration, the same in many other countries, South Korea, other countries. There's no working class party. There's no working class political alternative. Building mass working class parties is critical if we're going to fight fascism, or if we're going to defend the working class and the people of Palestine and the rest of the world, where the imperialists are using their tools of weapons to destroy them. That's it.
Thank you, Steve. So, Elaine, do you wish to make concluding remarks now?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, thank you everybody for all that really very interesting conversation. I mean, it's obviously very complicated and there's so many things it touches on. If I start with just Steve's last comment there, I mean, I totally agree that we're seeing the rise of the right and the rise of fascism everywhere. It seems to be quite concerted and organised. And what we're seeing as well then, even with governments, say, that were traditionally one left, one right, say with Labour and the Conservatives in the UK, the dial is being moved all the time. So you've now got a Labour government looking calling for deportations, do you know? or in the States. I mean, the Democrat Party aren't sort of left alternative anymore. The dial has moved all the way to the right. We're being asked to vote for lesser of evils, but it's still moving to the right. So that's a huge concern. I wanted to cover a couple of points. I think it probably kicked off with Eric's comments and followed then by what John said about settlers. Firstly, I would say that Israelis don't want to live beside Palestinians. They do live beside Palestinians in 48 Palestine, now called Israel, but Palestinians don't have equal rights. They're second-class citizens in their own land. Any system that privileges one people over another, and we know this in Ireland with partition in the north, the people don't give away their privileges willingly. It's, if you've given someone else's land, house, and then privilege over others, they're not going to give that up. And you're right, John, that settlers they take the lid off it because it's raw and it's honest. And what we're seeing at the moment is a sort of efforts as things start going south for Israel and Zionism, we're seeing efforts to do damage limitation. So scapegoat Netanyahu, scapegoat settlers, but it's all part of a continuum, and I'd really say do not fall for that ploy. It is a ploy because as long as Palestinians don't have the right to return to their homeland of 48 Palestine, we're still talking about settler colonialism. It's just a different type and an older one. There is a myth that the Arabs have been fighting, and Arabs and Jews have been fighting for hundreds or thousands of years. The fact is, at the turn of the last century, I think it was 12% of the population were Jewish in Palestine, and they lived very, very happily alongside their Arab neighbours and their Muslim neighbours, their Christian Arab neighbours, as did a lot of Jews living in the Middle East as well. I think, is it Iran or is it Iraq, that there was a very big population of Jewish people. So it's not true that Jewish people and Jews and Arabs are natural enemies who've been fighting for years. In fact, I think where Jews have faced most persecution has been in Europe, and that's just one of those sleights of hand in terms of how things are narrated. We shouldn't buy it. I just pulled up a quote here. I had included it. A woman called Deborah Bird Rose, she was an anthropologist. She said, "Whatever settlers may say, and they generally have a lot to say, the primary motive is not race. The primary motive is not race or religion, ethnicity, grade of civilization, etc., but to territory." And this is the motivation of settlers. Territoriality is settler colonialism's specific, irreducible element. Israel is a settler colonial state. America is a settler colonial state as well, built on genocide too. So I don't find it really surprising that the affinity that one would have for the other. We could reboot all the conversation again. There's so much food for thought, so much to think about. But I suppose if I wanted to leave you with something, I would say we have to centre Palestinian voices, and we have to uplift Palestinian voices. It's their land. They're the people experiencing and enduring this, and it's them we're in solidarity with. I would say that sometimes they'll say things wrong. They'll make mistakes. They'll misspeak. Happens to all of us. It should be allowed. It's not a crime, and you should be able to say, "I didn't mean that. I meant something else." That we're not allowed misspeak anymore, and Palestinians especially are not allowed misspeak. They're taken out of context. I particularly admire Mohammed El-Kurd. I don't know if you've come across him, but if you haven't, I'd really recommend you look him up. I actually visited his house in Jerusalem. His family are famous because settlers, he and his parents lived at the back of the house and the granny lived in the front. Settlers came and booted the granny out. She lives in the back with them, and they moved into the front. And for the El-Kurd family to go to their own home, they had to run the gauntlet. I've been there, going by settlers who would have thrown stones, beaten the children when they were little and stuff like that. It was really, really shocking. And now he's emerged as this incredible voice And he doesn't care who he offends. And I think, why would we ask a victimized people to be civil and not to offend the perpetrator in that case? I think we should uplift Palestinian voices. In the US, Stephen Salaita is another person. He lost his university job in the 2014 offensive for saying "fuck Israel" or something like that. And he was accused of incivility and sacked from his job. And he's sort of been blacklisted really ever since. But, you know, why are we buying into it that this demand for civility, that we don't misspeak? If there's an offence, it's the offence of seeing burned, charred bodies of parents carrying their children in plastic bags. It's medics it's ambulances being bombed, first responders. They do the double hit where they target a place and then the ambulances arrive and then they hit it again and they kill the first responders. These are the really offensive things. We have to reclaim our narrative, and we have to steel ourselves against the criticism we're coming for. And I do agree we have to really be vigilant not to allow anti-Semitism to come into it. And when I say, you know, the sort of, I don't want to say old school anti-Semitism, but I'm talking about the IHR, whatever it is, definition has really muddied the waters, you know, and you now have it reported that there's so many instances of anti-Semitism in the UK, and then it turns out that, you know, it was something like someone chanting "Free Palestine" or "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and that's now considered anti-Semitism. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. I can't remember. Was it you, Roger? Somebody really described how it's making this comeback and what we have to be vigilant against. And I agree with that. But we just have to still send to Palestinians and stand in solidarity with them whilst being vigilant against all racisms. That's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the invitation, comrades, and I wish you well in all your endeavours.
Thank you, Elaine, for a very, very important, very stimulating, very interesting opening contribution, and also your later interventions in the discussion. You've also pointed out the important lessons for the entire world, lessons from the events that are currently happening in Palestine and in the Middle East. And when we have discussions of this nature, the first conclusion is action. There has to be action. We must take action on this issue, principally trade union action. So whether it be trade union action in Ireland to prevent arms being transported through Shannon or anywhere else. In fact, there was a demonstration recently in Dublin against a French company who is transporting arms to Israel. There's a demonstration outside their headquarters in Swords. But action, not just action, there's also a need to study, to think, to discuss, to read, to research the details of what's happening in Palestine. We stand for the independence, the right of independence to the Palestinian people. And that right was denied them following World War I and subsequently, obviously, up to the settlement after the Second World War. But after World War I, independence was given to a succession of countries, but Britain maintained its mandate in Palestine. Israel, the Israeli government now rejects that entirely. They want no state of any kind or no independent presence of any kind in their vicinity. I want to thank also the comrades who spoke in the discussion. The contributions were well thought out, well considered and well presented. So all the comrades who contributed were coherent and thoughtful in their contribution, which is a tradition of these WIN meetings. And I'll conclude with just an illustration from my own experience. When we were in Palestine in recent years, we went to the city of Hebron. Hebron used to be an Arab city, a Palestinian city, which is now being taken over lock, stock and barrel by Jewish settlers, Jewish shops, Jewish premises, and Palestinian places are being shut down. The Israeli flag is beginning to appear on areas which were previously owned by Palestinians. Now, on the outskirts of Hebron is a monument. It's a grave. It's very well kept, very well maintained. And the grave is that of Goldstein, Goldstein was a mass murderer who went into the temple in Hebron and slaughtered Palestinians. The grave, or more properly called a monument, just in Hebron, is kept as a current issue because there's a tradition of putting fresh stones on the grave, and there's a constant supply of fresh stones appearing on the grave of Goldstein, a mass murderer of Palestinian people. So to me, that was an illustration of the situation that Palestinians are facing in the West Bank. So thanks once again, comrades, for your contributions, and thanks to Elaine for opening the discussion. Now we're going to have a further discussion on a different topic next week. So Roger might wish to say a few words about our meeting, the WIN meeting next week.
Yes, thank you. It's already been referred to by the comrades from the USA. Next week we'll have a meeting on the very world-shaking event. We should or may by then know the result of the US presidential election and what it will mean. And as comrades have already commented, whatever the result is announced, it won't be the end of the story, and it could well be that that USA, as part of its global decline, may also be moving towards huge convulsions, upheavals, and possibly even on the road towards civil war. So we're inviting all the US comrades, particularly to attend, and of course there'll be worldwide interest. I hope comrades will tell their friends and tell their comrades, and we have a really big meeting to hear the report of what's going on from all the US comrades. It will be the meeting will be led off by a veteran trade union Marxist, Jack Gerson, and but we also particularly welcome all the comrades from the USA and of course from everywhere to contribute to the discussion. So that's next week. Please keep this in mind, everybody.
Thank you, Roger. So with that, we'll conclude the meeting.
I know we've sort of finished, but just noticed, Phil, Nora has
yes.
a hand up.
Yes. Sorry, who's the hand up?
Nora has a hand up. I know it's a bit late in the discussion, but I'm just pointing it out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for the discussion. It was. I did learn a few things, but I didn't really feel I had anything to add, except on the 29th of November, it is the UN Day of Solidarity with Palestine, and certainly in Barnsley, in north of England, where I am, we are making sure that our council has the Palestine flag on its buildings. And maybe that's one of the actions that people could aim for, just to show solidarity and get the discussion.
Thank you, Norma. I apologize for not seeing
It's okay.
when you indicated that it's my responsibility, and I apologize for that, but thank you for your contribution. So with that, we'll close the meeting, and thank you all once again for your attendance. So good night and have a nice evening. So slán go léir agus síomhá.
Solidarity.